we've seen a lot of changes in the PR and communications industry over that time, but certainly 2020 was one for the books. Before we get started on the actual report findings, I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who took part in the research. Once again, we were overwhelmed and incredibly grateful to more than 300 people who took their time to share their experiences with us. Your generosity was especially appreciated at this time when many of you are still working from home and juggling many balls. So thank you. As we started the research for this year's report, we really wanted to find out how the public relations and communications industry navigated 2020 and what was the impact of the global pandemic and geopolitical tensions on our sector, and is that impact lasting? Throughout our discussions, it became apparent that last year provided a chance to press pause and really question what we've been doing in the industry and how we've been doing it. We found an overwhelming sense of fatigue, but also hope and cautious optimism that many of the positive changes can and will be encultured in the future. But first, to the cause of the fatigue: remote working. It's not optimal for an industry that's centered around teamwork and communication. The thin line separating work from personal life just dissolved in 2020. And without a physical separation, many people found themselves working longer hours for longer stretches. So let's talk about compensation. It was a tough year financially, with 10% of people experiencing a decrease in pay from 2019, and 40% receiving the same salary as 2019. Sadly, agencies bore the brunt of the hardship, with almost 3 times as many agency staff reporting reduced salaries than in-house staff. Additionally, almost 1 in 5 people received a lower bonus and reduced benefits. However, despite this, the vast majority of people, 80% in fact, described being satisfied with their current compensation and job. Sadly, 6% were extremely unsatisfied. There were some trends that helped to maintain positivity and engagement this year. Firstly, the increased recognition of the value of the communications function. In 2020, the reliance on the comms function meant that many more communications professionals were included in strategic business discussions and decision-making. Secondly, authenticity and humanity. Clients, agency partners, bosses, and team members became real people as virtual meetings took place in their homes, with their families and their pets in the background. We heard stories of agencies providing pro bono services to struggling clients and employers providing increased support to staff to foster physical well-being and mental health. Agility and adaptability were the key attributes of the communications professionals in 2020. And demand shifted away from events and consumer activation towards internal comms, strategic counsel, and digital. People and teams who were able to pivot into these functions were highly valued. The report also raised some questions about the future of the industry. What are the opportunities and risks for talent development? And what is the future of the office environment? And how can communications maintain its increased status? So to discuss these questions and to offer hopefully some solutions, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel of industry experts today. HS Chung, founder and CEO, Career President, Asia, Hill & Knowlton Strategies. John Dawson, CEO, Akara Strategy. Lauren Myers-Kavanagh, Head of Policy Communications, APAC, Twitter. And Eva Sobanmu, Head of Communications, Asia Pacific, JLL. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. And as Craig mentioned, if anyone does have a question, please put it in the chat box, and we will certainly try and address that at the end of this session. So first of all, I want to talk about the impact of the pandemic on the industry. 71% of agency and 100% of in-house survey respondents notice a much greater appreciation of of the communications function, with 1/3 saying that this greater appreciation has been shown by the increased inclusion of communications teams in business decisions and discussions. So I'd like to ask the panelists, is this a good time to be a comms professional in Asia Pacific? John, let's start with you.
Absolutely, Emma, because I think that the demand, I think for media council, for example, a lot of people are concerned about being taken out of context in a kind of story. So they're advising on that's been quite strong demand for me. Crisis council, internal communications council, all these things are huge in demand right now. So I think, yes, absolutely. Short answer for you to start.
Thank you. HS?
Let me unmute. Sorry about that. I absolutely echo John. I feel it's the perfect time. In fact, we've reached a certain momentum that we've never experienced, where I feel much more confident recommending to the juniors and also people in university asking, should I go into communication career? I feel much more confident to say yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Eva?
Yes, so thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here, and I absolutely echo the sentiments of John and HS. It's really a very interesting and rewarding time to be a communications professional. And sort of sharing a little bit of a personal example, I work in-house for JLL, which is a big real estate services company, and we have about 92,000 employees around the world. So one of the biggest challenges we had was obviously trying to connect with our workforce using communications during the pandemic. And then, of course, connecting with all of our external stakeholders, clients, governments, the media. And so we definitely felt as a team that our skills as comms people were more in demand and valued than ever before. We were invited to the kind of meetings that we'd probably never been invited to before. And I think it's a really great opportunity for communications to continue going up the value chain, because there's all sorts of other issues, I think, where our expertise will be really valuable going forward as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Lauren?
Echo what the other panelists have said. I guess the related question here for me, Emma, is if now is a good time and comms has proven its weight in gold, can it last, right? And I think if there's any universal truths in comms, I think it's the resilience of the people working in it. So I guess the caveat to saying, is it a good time to be in comms? The question is, are you resilient? And if the answer is yes, then I would say probably it is a good time. I think the pandemic has necessitated a level of adaptability, both to the unexpected, the unknown, often the uncomfortable. I really think comms professionals, certainly the ones that I know, really rose to the challenge. I think I'd struggle to think of any organization for whom COVID wasn't a test bed of whether they had strong comms foundations. And I think if anything, and I don't know if others can relate to this, and for folks listening in, I think we've seen comms actually plugging gaps in places where maybe there wasn't operational rigor. Comms has actually been driving internal agendas for change because we are on the front foot and we are public facing. It's very often a sort of mirror back to the organization to say we need to be making these changes. I think dealing with the immediate fallout of COVID was only job number one. And actually, I think in many ways, the biggest challenges still loom for communicators. I think persuading people to accept COVID vaccines, ensuring employees are still the first to know about policy developments, about operational changes, about company performance. And in a way, because the pandemic has had the effect of holding a mirror up, not only to businesses, but to society, I think in some ways we've revealed in new ways where all the unpleasantness lies. So gaping inequality, climate change, these are issues that communicators are well positioned to lead on. And I think, there's a great George Bernard Shaw quote that others in comms might recognize. And that's the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. And I think 2020 and now 2021, we were all under the illusion that we were leaving behind a pretty bleak year. And here we are in 2021 grappling with the same issues. I think if anything, it's the time to double down.
Brilliant. Thank you. So now that I guess the initial chaos surrounding COVID has subsided a little bit, like you just said, Lauren, it's a matter of keeping going. How likely is it that the comms function can maintain its high profile? HS, what are your views on this?
I think it's very likely. I think, I completely echo Lauren's comment about this is more than just communication, but we actually were the people who were bridging the internal and the external, bridging all aspects of communication across. It was us who was sort of functioning like the glue. But one thing that's significant was that, we've had other significant, should we say, crisis before, whether be it Lehman Brothers situations or the economic crisis back in wherever. We've also had SARS in 2002. During those period also, comms function came about, meaning we were important and we functioned more as a functional role. But what made us different during COVID is the fact that our role became more valuable in every decision-making process. And I think the decision makers, whether it's in-house decision makers or whether it's agency people trying to get more access to C-suite consultation type of on-the-table discussions, the fact that the comms people and the communication consultation was at the core of purpose-driven communication, and also the fact that it's being valued, is something that is strikingly different than the other crises that we've had in the past, which just makes it so much more confident for me to say that I do believe it is going to last. In fact, it's only going to get stronger.
Okay. Lauren, is there anything else you want to add on that about how you feel you're going to keep this high profile?
No, I think we've captured it. I mean, I think the reality is, if there are doubters out there, I think there are plenty of sort of proof points of where pulling the plug on comms, I think, can have detrimental effect. And to HS's point, this is different to previous crises. And anyone who wants to kind of crystal ball gaze and say, if we're going to make cuts in 2021, I'm thinking about a line item in comms where I think we can slice and dice. I would say, approach with caution, and hopefully that isn't the case for any of the folks on the panel or certainly the folks dialing in.
And let's talk about skill sets, adapting the traditional PR and communication skill sets. So in the interviews and the survey we conducted, we heard a lot about the increased demand for and value attributed to internal communications and strategic counsel. But how well prepared were you and your teams to actually pivot into these areas? Eva?
So we were actually quite well prepared to provide that kind of strategic support. I guess the difference was that the workload increased massively and was really pretty relentless for the best part of a year. So I did feel really strongly that, as a team, we were very focused on communicating with employees about their health and well-being, but we have to make sure that we are also supporting our own health and well-being. And I think that's the hard part for comms teams. And, 2021 hasn't necessarily been that different, really, so far. The workload is still huge. But I guess the upside to all of this is that I feel as a team, we have an immense sense of satisfaction about the contribution we're making. So we know we're playing an important role. We know that our sort of credibility has increased and we're going up the value chain. So I think that really helps to kind of motivate and maintain morale and, obviously prepares us for the opportunities ahead, I think, which is the other thing that keeps us motivated. So, other panelists have talked about sort of the fact that communications has sort of proved its worth. And as companies face many other issues related to diversity and inclusion, sustainability, ethics, we as a function are going to be able to contribute greatly to that. And I think that's a real opportunity.
So do you feel, you've obviously got these internal comms specialists in your team, quite a few of them. Do you feel that internal comms is going to continue to be in high demand and just will carry on? Or do you think the industry is going to revert to pre-pandemic priorities?
My view is that the demand for really skilled internal comms people will continue, but I think having an integrated function is really critical. So joining the dots from external to internal, I think, is really important. And that's certainly what I've tried to achieve with my team. We have external expertise, we have internal experts, but we all very much work very, very closely together.
Yeah,
And what about from an agency perspective, HS? You know, were you all prepared to suddenly be giving a lot more strategic counsel and internal communications assistance to clients?
So luckily, I mean, to be able to be competitive, because obviously agency, we have to think ahead. We have to think ahead about what clients would be needing in the future, for example. So, you know, a lot of the required services such as purpose-driven communication to internal comms to change management consultations has been in the works. And, you know, there are services and programs and approaches that have been launched and we have been trained up. It's just that there were not many cases where we were able to actually exercise that in full scale, particularly at C-suite levels and being able to discuss it, decision-making processes along that line. So I guess it really gave us the opportunity to dive into actual work, which was so valuable. And, you know, I think, you know, going back to the internal comm area, because it did require a lot of change management during COVID, there was a lot of internal comm required. But I think in a broader term, it's really more about us managing as comms people, diverse stakeholder management going forward. So stakeholder comms, which includes internal as well. So that to me is going to be as more important post-pandemic because the paradigm has changed. Corporations will probably want to look at the dynamics of the different stakeholders going forward. And that includes internal comm as well. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
So let's talk about resilience that Lauren has mentioned as well, that we need to carry on this resilience if we're going to be really good communications professionals. So half of the people that we surveyed had their salaries lowered or frozen in 2020. And agency staff were sadly hit hardest, with almost 3 times as many agency employees receiving lower pay than in-house staff. Yet 80% reported they were satisfied with their current situation. So as industry leaders, how worried are you that people will abandon the industry altogether? John?
I'm not worried at all. I think resilience is the word for 2020, 2021. I actually pivot in my sleep, Emma, because I'm pivoting all the time. I launched a car, as you know, in September 2019, protests. I had these 5 big brands lined up. COVID comes, internal communication. I have to pivot again and pivot again and pivot again. I'm always pivoting. Pivot's my middle name. So, you know, I think what I've definitely found is that the demand from my experience, having been in a newsroom for 20 years, that the demand for media guidance is pretty high because, of course, everyone's quite nervous about being taken out of context and this kind of story. Don't talk to the press. Talk to the press. Why would you talk to the press at all? Because I mean, that's the major concern right now. I think for me anyway. So media training, media strategy, media counsel is quite strong. In that, of course, there is crisis communications. So I think that I think what's very important now in this current environment is to have a very high EQ as well as IQ. Understand the client, listen to the client, because the client often you think you know what they want, but they don't, or you don't, because you walk in the room and they go, "Well, I need this, this, and this." Differences, therefore, compared to 2018 or so, because I think what they've seen, what the change they've seen now is the fact that perhaps the concern is about people in the kind of company as opposed to external affairs. So I think really it's about having a high EQ rather than anything else.
Okay. HS, do you feel
if that makes sense? Bit of a ramble there.
HS, how do you feel about engaging and keeping your staff in the industry, or do you think they'll leave?
I think 2020, if I can just have one keyword to describe it, I think that word or vocabulary is uncertainty. And I think a lot of our staff at the agency side, because we're so dependent on how the industry moves or economically how the economy moves, or even how our clients' state of financial situation may be, or what changes are being made, because there were decisions that we were unable to control ourselves, that most of our staff, regardless of the title, were empathetic of the situation and felt, uncertainty, which I think was the biggest fright more than anything else. So, while, as you say, despite the fact that, there were not much increase and so forth, and particularly at the agency side, interesting to see 80% were not complaining is because I think they empathized and they understand. But what is more frightening is fatigue, is the mental health, which I think it's just cannot be compared to monetary sense, where there's limits to what we can do because we can't meet each other. Everything's online. I think you will all recall the first couple of months since the pandemic broke, probably around in February, March timing. I mean, there were like tons of emails coming in everywhere saying change is coming with all these research here and there. I mean, it was to a point where everything, felt too much. So it just got everybody really tense and sensitive and nervous, and the sense of uncertainty came even more about. And then after that, the fatigue, when is this ending? When is this happening? I think this was more high on the agenda of their concern and their every day-to-day issue than the pay actual itself. But going into 2021, I think what's going to really be important, particularly even at agency side, is that we don't just follow the industry and the economy and how clients are running. I mean, that's our DNA, but we of course have to be mindful of that. But it's not that we're following everything and making decisions just because of that. I think agencies will also need to have a vision and need to have a career path and be able to have strategic standards going forward to agency staff so that they feel rewarded, not just from monetary sense, but being part of the agency family. And I think going forward, that's going to be super important in 2021.
Absolutely. And what are you and your organizations doing to keep your talent engaged from an in-house perspective? So Eva and Lauren, do you want to add to that?
I can jump in first, Eva. So look, uncertainty is a word that resonates probably with the panel and with the audience today. If you work for the company that I work for, uncertainty was not only COVID related, but the tweeter-in-chief until a couple of weeks ago, which of course kept us very busy and on our toes for a very long time. But I think there were a lot of emotional highs and lows. I think the toll on mental health is something that Twitter is still grappling with. One thing just to get concrete for you, Emma, in terms of what some of the big companies are doing to grapple with this stuff. Something that Twitter's done that I think is having more than just a kind of a temporary uplift on morale is company-wide rest days. So officially, on a Friday or a Monday, these dates get fixed in advance and everyone is meant to be off. So they're intended to not be public holidays. This is a company-wide day of rest. I think the other thing that Twitter recognizes is that fundamentally there is a desire, especially with the younger generation coming in to work, that they want to have a say in what the future of the company looks like and how we're getting there, and that they're kind of part of a critical mass. And there's a few key ways that I guess Twitter enables that. One is business resources groups. I'm sure all the panelists have something similar, or certainly you're helping your clients facilitate these. So it's fundamental to the way that Twitter devises policy because it's an open process, and the people who run our business resources groups across gender, across family, across you name it, this is actually driving policy change for the organization. And so, one example is our gender equality policy of getting to 50-50 by 2025 across the organization. It's going to require a big uplift in areas like engineering and leadership. We've made a pledge that by 2025 we'll get there. And these business resources groups that are made up of people cross-functionally across the organization from all levels and backgrounds are helping us get there. And then I guess just the final thing in terms of keeping people motivated is a learning allowance. So of course, in a work from home environment where, you might be dialing into meetings all day long and, you sort of get that fatigue, there's a separate stipend available for everybody in the company to be learning outside of work. And it's linked, to your goals and so on and so forth. But I think that is a really significant impact in terms of engagement and morale with Twitter employees.
Fantastic, thanks. Eva, what did you learn?
So I was just going to sort of echo what Lauren said about business resource groups, because I think that definitely is something, and you know, it's beyond COVID. It's also related to all the other sort of social issues that global companies are facing, that BRGs have definitely sort of stepped up in terms of influence in companies, because I was a little bit cynical and felt that at times those groups are a bit peripheral and, you know, niche, and nobody listens to them except the people who are in the group. But I do think that's changing. And I think businesses are responding to what those groups are saying, which is really fantastic to hear. And, you know, one of the other things that we did at JLL sort of company-wide was we had learning opportunities. So they opened up LinkedIn Learning to everybody, and apparently that was huge. So I looked at the stats, and there were tons of people who were trying all different sort of types of learning opportunities. So that was really amazing. And then we also had employee assistance programs to support people's mental health, and really just tried to talk more openly about mental health. And, you know, I definitely tried to do that in my own sort of small team. But I think what's really interesting, and speaking as an internal comms person as well, is that, you know, we were very much as a team about pushing out company messages, and obviously trying to make them as sort of human and morale boosting as possible. But we started to see in employee surveys that people were responding that, you know, that's great and we love the corporate messages, but we have to make sure that that is also replicated at sort of team level. So I think as internal comms professionals, you have to recognize that your impact, you can't fix all the communications issues in a whole company, and that it is about culture and making sure that you're enabling people within the company and leaders to communicate effectively and to really nurture their teams. And that's really what's going to maintain morale. So those company-wide programs, learning and employee assistant programs, are absolutely critical, and all good companies should have them. But I think you also have to enable leaders to really be sort of human and nurturing of their own teams, and that's where the impact is.
And we've obviously talked about it's a great time to be a communications professional, in the fact that it's such interesting work, I guess. But how will you attract new talent into your organizations when I think particularly 2021 is going to be a very competitive marketplace? You know, when I was doing the surveys or looking at the survey results and also interviewing, I think there's going to be quite a lot of change this year in terms of people wanting to move jobs. And it may not be for great reasons. I think people are literally needing some change in their life. But how are you going to attract people to your organizations when you need new talent? You know, when you're all still working from home, let's say, you know, how are you going to differentiate yourself, and how easy is this going to be? How about the agency perspective, first of all? HS, John, what are your thoughts on that?
John, do you want to go first?
I'm just me, HS, so after you, please.
Okay.
I'm gonna hire in about 6 months' time, hopefully, fingers crossed. And have, you know, Emma Dales help me with business.
So I think naturally, as we hopefully, you know, as the vaccine goes, and hopefully in 2021, it would be a better second half, there's going to be a natural turnover. And part of that's because people just need change. They just want change of environment, atmosphere, you know, just some change. But that doesn't mean, you know, everybody's going to change. I think what is going to be important is during that change process, you know, as Lauren and Eva was just saying, what is the company value? And, you know, some of the important value that people are now seeking in corporations, whether be it DE&I initiative to sustainability initiatives to, you know, having a really solid vision for the future, career path for the staff, and is that corporation transparent and frequently communicating to the staff to the level that they feel they're engaged? These are all elements that's going to be super important for any new talent making judgment of, you know, who they want to work with. And I think that is going to be critical, whether it's in-house or agency. But if I can just speak from an agency side, I do have to say, you know, we, you know, maybe I mentioned it in my previous answer, but we tend to be more sensitive to what's happening with our client side of things, and we restructure and we make faster moves. And when we say restructure, it's mainly on manpower and people, isn't it? So I think we need to be, in some ways, a bit more resilient and be core to some of our vision as well. And, also making sure that we are also in the forerunning in offering something that the industry is requiring that we may never have had. For example, like in Asia Pacific, sustainability is one example of a service which we talked about it a lot, but not to the depth of what Europe or United States is doing, for example. But we think since COVID, this is one area that is now going to be important in Asia Pacific. But are we ready? Can we do it? But if there's an agency that actually has the tool and the service and is able to train up people, so people who value this space can actually join this type of agency to be able to really build their career up. I think these are also some really important new service areas and in-depth service area that could potentially also attract new talents.
Fantastic, thank you. Eva, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, Emma. I think there will be people who sort of are just trying to have a change and, they've maybe reassessed what they want to do. And, my sort of priority is to keep my fantastic team engaged for as long as possible. But when it comes to attracting new talent, my approach is just to be really open-minded about the type of people to bring in. And I think sometimes companies can be a bit hindered by the idea of culture fit. And obviously culture is important, but it's really about looking beyond somebody's obvious sort of personality traits and really thinking about, what drives them, what's important to them, what motivates them. And I think that gives you a better understanding of culture fit, but obviously, beyond technical skills, I mean. So I think, my approach, if I'm, looking to recruit in 2021, is to just kind of have that openness and transparency about this is what you can expect from a career at JLL, and, be really transparent about it so that that person can really understand what they're sort of letting themselves in for. I think that's the crucial thing.
Sure. I'd just like to say thank you so much for your questions that are coming in the chat box. Just keep them coming, and we will obviously address those towards the end. Let's talk more about remote working. So 2020 has obviously proven the business case for remote working, which is a significant shift away from the working culture that we previously had in Asia, which has been totally underpinned by presenteeism. However, we now need to think about how is this working from home going to affect people's careers. Now, as you all came in, you were answering a question. Will it be detrimental to their careers if people continue working remotely as offices begin to reopen? So we've got 27% saying yes, 48% saying no, 25% saying don't know. Okay, interesting. So do you think there's going to be a bias against people who work remotely when there's an option to actually work back in the office? Because people will have different views as to where they want to be. Let's look at Lauren. What's your perspective from Twitter's point of view?
Yeah, so look, I'm an interesting use case on a personal note, and this relates, I think, to the previous conversation about churn and people deciding to leave. So I joined Twitter completely remotely, onboarded during the pandemic, coming up to 5 months ago. And it's a brave choice. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. Certainly has its challenges, and I think to Eva's point, I was well warned in advance about the company. It was completely transparent about the role and the role I was coming in to do and the team that I was being empowered to build. And I think that's where Twitter has it exactly right. Look, the company's gone on record with this. It was one of the first companies to go to a work from home model in the face of COVID. And actually the steps to get to work from home were underway well before COVID in a kind of decentralization model. So I think in some ways we were really well positioned and probably uniquely positioned to both respond quickly and ably to allow folks to work remotely. And we've supported a distributed workforce for a long time. I think the past year was actually a test case as opposed to a sort of rush we must do. So the answer is if employees are in a role and situation that enables them to work from home, and that's what they want to continue to do forever, Twitter's going to make that happen. So the kind of ethos is opening offices is going to be our decision. When and if employees come back to the office will be theirs. And it's as simple as that. So I think in every way possible, the company is trying to eliminate any sort of bias. I know that was the specific question. And indeed, around the world, we've done all sorts of pulse surveys on a regular basis. The lion's share of employees are saying that they will continue to work from home. If not in full, then there'll be a hybrid model. So I think you'll have in very rare cases individuals who are selecting to go back full-time 5 days a week, with the exception of a few kind of critical roles. So thankfully, people are already well accustomed. We've got great tools. Everyone loves Slack, everyone loves GChat. And they really do work. And I can say that wholeheartedly, having just been through the process and having never stepped foot in the Twitter offices.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. What about an agency perspective? John and NHS, what are your thoughts about a bias against people working remotely?
I think it's case by case, isn't it? Sorry, HS. I think because given the Hong Kong, for example, small apartments, families of their elderly parents, I think you can't just judge. You can't work from home. You can't work from home. Some people want to be in the office because it's better to work from there because they've got kids running around, etc. Some can't because of COVID concerns. They can't actually leave their flat. Then you've got this question here, Emma, from Caroline, saying that I flagged the issue that most people are confusing home remote working and home working during lockdowns, which add an extreme layer of challenges and is, quote, not normal. So therefore, the difference between lockdown home working, of course, remote working in this environment is quite different. So I think, it's a case by case, country by country, and it's very, very different. I mean, at home, there are all sorts of problems going on. And therefore, for some, for example, these blue-red teams, A and B teams, and the big banks, for example, big corporates, that works very well. Some people can't leave their flat or house. Some have to leave their flat or house. I just think it's different. I think flexibility is very important right now. Empathy as well, to be honest.
Absolutely. Yeah. HS?
Yeah, I think, again, I think it's going to be a little bit different by country. So for example, but what is important is that the perception of work from home was never a consistent perception or a norm that we've experienced in Asia. It was not normal to work from home. But now I think people are not afraid to say it and, even question it or even talk about possibility of doing that post-COVID, which means there's a lot of perception change, which I think it's a huge improvement in that sense. However, as the markets start picking up, so I'll give you an example of Korea. Obviously we have more cases in 2020 than a country like Singapore, for example. Despite that, most of our offices, including our clients, were in the office working. So it's culturally different by country, where I guess teamwork is considered a bit more important in some culture. And in that type of culture, even when we do exercise work from home, it needs to be something more of a hybrid model, for example. So as Lauren was saying, more and more as our economy picks up, we go back to the normal situations. I think rather than just completely staying at home, it could more possibly be more like a hybrid model for agency perspective. So
okay,
we'll see how that goes end of 2021.
Sure. Eva?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a really interesting question, and particularly for somebody like me who works for a big real estate firm. So our business is leasing and selling office buildings. So I'm trying not to obviously be biased here. But, obviously working from home has been great for some people. And, I can think of one of my very good friends who has reduced mobility, and she was already working from home because of that before the pandemic. And she said to me that, once everybody was working from home, she felt like she'd had a head start because she'd already kind of got used to the norms and everyone else was forced to do what she'd been doing, very effectively. So I think it's obviously a great opportunity for some people, and the flexibility is really important. But I really do believe the office is here to stay. And, I've had the opportunity in Singapore to be on A and B teams, which means I have 1 week in the office, 1 week at home. And I can't tell you what a relief it is to get in and see my team. And I think for those of us who are a bit more established in our careers, you know, networking via conference calls and just, you know, having those chats is great. But I do think for younger people who are starting out, they'll really miss out if they don't have that office environment. And it's partly the reasons that John mentioned, that maybe their home situation, they don't have a sort of dedicated home office, they're still living with their parents. You know, that's not ideal, and they probably feel much more productive in an office, but they also want to socialize and network and build their own reputations. So, you know, our research at JLL shows that people do really appreciate the flexibility, but they do want this sort of hybrid model where they have a bit more time working from home, but can still go to the office. So yeah, that's kind of my view on it.
Thank you, that's great. So what will you do to ensure that individuals continue learning? Because this is my concern, is that if we've got people at home, how are they going to progress their careers? How are they going to learn from people above them? It's just not as easy. So, you know, what systems are you putting in place to ensure that people are going to carry on learning? Lauren, do you want to talk about that first of all?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I mentioned this in one of the earlier discussions that Twitter has a learning stipend available for every employee, and I know just about everybody takes that up. I think, you know, some of this boils down to, I think, what a lot of us are talking about, and what's maybe more unique about the comms industry than others is relationships, right? It's a relationship business. I worked on the agency side. I'm now in-house. It's no different. Like that is the great equalizer, right? Building relationships. And as Eva said, for those of us who are a little bit more established in our careers, and my personal story of having jumped ship mid-pandemic, you know, I would be lying if I said that was easy, because you're having to build relationships, in my case, you know, regionally and globally, and build a team and build trust all over this format, the VC format. And, you know, your gut has to tune in pretty in I guess, in new ways that we haven't been prepared for before this year. And you're not picking up the sort of breadcrumbs that you might get in hallway conversations and over lunch, over coffee. And I don't know if it's the case for others, but a lot of things have to be scheduled. The spontaneity of the office is largely not available to us in this format. So I think as managers, those of us who manage folks or who've got teams and they're distributed teams, I know that's the case for me, this point about sort of not letting people slip behind, keeping them engaged, keeping them motivated, requires an extra duty of care. And I think, as John said, emotional intelligence that draws on perhaps more of our reservoirs than we've had to in previous roles where we've all been physically in the office, and you can pick up on little cues. So I don't think there's a magic playbook for this. I think there's some real kind of human principles that apply across agency, across in-house, and it starts with relationships. Don't know what others feel.
Thank you. So what about from an agency perspective, HS, how do you feel you're going to really carry on building people's careers and getting them promoted?
I think learning, so if I can touch on that subject as well, I do want to say, you know, if we're going to adopt a hybrid model or continue some sort of a work from home situation, or if we look in 2021, obviously we're going to continue with the pandemic situation, individuals have to make firm commitment to themselves to really try to learn. In other words, there's learning where companies and corporations can, you know, set up a system and, you know, we provide it for you, which is definitely what's going to happen. But unless you are wanting to learn and that you're motivated to learn and you want to and feel the need to learn, and I just feel like individuals have to make the effort nowadays to really just get yourself up and be able to, even if it's really tiring and there's fatigue and this and that, you know, because what's going to happen, the reality is after the pandemic, those who tried and made the effort to learn to that level and those who may have not, there's going to be a difference. And I think, you know, we're in an industry as communicators that we cannot stop but to learn and continue to keep up with the pace and, you know, the changes happening around us. And that's just our career, not just in our career, but it's just the industry that we're in. So I just feel that's one area. And plus, you know, the more established seniors, for example, you know, not only learning for yourself, but ensuring that your junior team members are getting the right training, particularly the new startup, the juniors who are starting new in the industry. I mean, can you imagine if you were them and not being able to really have the indirect experience of being in an office and, you know, the valuable socializations to hearing about different cases and what other teams are doing, you know, and seeing what they're doing or going to their events. These are all really valuable things that, you know, we just cannot do online. And so, I mean, we need to somehow empathize with that and try to share a lot of this with them and try to make sure that they're getting the right level of training. So all the training from all the way up here from company level, I'm very sure it's going to happen, whether in-house, agency, or whatever, and it's going to be actually quite mandated, right? But I think unless individuals make the effort, and unless the seniors who are taking care of the team groups also pay attention to this, you know, it's not going to be that effective, from my view. So I think that's where the communication part needs to come in as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Unger, I agree with that. Can I have one story? A friend of mine told me on Sunday over a hike that he's one of the head of comms, one of the big banks. And he was so impressed by the incoming graduate 27-year-olds. They're so intelligent, very hungry, very driven, super smart, proactive, that he's put the best thing he's seen in years in terms of hiring. That was quite incredible to hear, right? So it's in 27-year-olds, 28-year-olds. Again, he's just seen the kind of competition for places, and the level of quality of incoming kind of professionals is super high. Super high for him, which is great to hear, right? Great to hear.
Absolutely. Let's hope those individuals come into comms and not just investment banks.
We're getting to his comms, not my comms, but maybe your comms.
So why don't we answer a few questions, because I'm aware that we've got less than 10 minutes here. If I can just run through some. Speaking of internal communications, do you use a different approach during working from home, or do you mostly use the same approach? Eva, I don't know if you want to address that as an internal comms specialist.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a fascinating point. And for a company like JLL, we actually have about 42,000 employees in Asia Pacific, and some of them are in corporate offices and some of them are working on client sites. So we've always had a challenge in terms of reaching everybody. And so we really had to innovate in terms of thinking of ways to sort of communicate messages to those employees. And it had to really go beyond email. So we recognized, obviously, Teams is an application that really hadn't taken off massively, but then suddenly when we were all working from home, it became increasingly important as a channel. And then we also had to make sure we were using the kind of apps that people use in their everyday life, like WhatsApp and WeChat in China. So we were integrating messaging, you know, much of it about health and safety, etc., into that as well. And then once offices started to open, we opened up a new channel, which is basically WebEx screens. So in every meeting room where there's a WebEx screen, we would have a QR code with like company messages that you could scan and download. So we really looked at all the different ways we could sort of reach into the organization.
Fantastic, thank you. Next question, how are you supporting people's health and wellness remotely now that they're working from home? Oh, sorry, now that working from home is here for the long term. Does anybody want to give some suggestions as to what you're doing for your current employees?
So everyone's quiet, which means this is probably the most difficult question. You know, probably a question that every CEO it gets them up at night trying to think about it, because there is really no other solution but to engage and talk and chat and, you know, communicate. And, you know, I think, you know, in the beginning, if you all recall, we've all had on the Instagrams, you know, everybody was doing the nice wine sessions, you know, the coffee sessions, and where we had everyone holding on to cup. No one does it anymore because it's become a routine. It's tedious now. It's, you know, it's no more fun. So it just says there's obviously things like, you know, a hotline where you can give a call. For example, WPP is exercising something like that, where you can actually go and talk to somebody external if you need to, and things like that. But nothing helps more than talking to a peer or to your bosses and being very transparent about, when you're feeling not well, or, feeling you need to take some break or whatever that may be. And I think we just need to be a lot more mindful of situations like that than ever before, and just take it by case and try to pull this through together as a team. There's really not one solid answer to this difficult question from my view.
But I think, as you say, communication is key. And I think from what my conversation.
Absolutely.
Also transparency, openness, empathy, all these things are really important, more than ever, I think.
And I think it's also just allowing people to realize that it's actually okay to not feel great. And I think communication and the conversations, you're absolutely right, HS, but at the beginning of this, I think we had an influx of, we're doing a karaoke party online and we're doing our cocktail making online. And I just get the sense that fatigue is creeping in as well for things like that. And, obviously, if anybody has any great tips, I'm sure everybody would want to hear about them. But it certainly seems that it's just a matter of communicating really, really well, being open and just checking that everyone's okay. Are you okay? Just a simple question. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, mental health awareness, Emma, is so important right now as well. I mean, we've touched on it before, but I think in so many houses right now around the world, there are some serious domestic situations going on. I think that no one's really aware of it in the office. I think understanding what the people are going through, and they might not be talking about it because they're quite scared to be at home, openly talk about it in front of families. It's quite an awkward situation to be in. Yeah. So I think understanding and having that empathy is so important right now.
Can I just add one other thing to this? And this is more from a personal view than a Twitter house view. But I think certainly the support that I've seen across the spectrum is addressing, in many cases, the more obvious situations. So parents who are stuck at home with kids, offering sort of adjusted working hours or some sort of compensation to address that. I think there's a risk of forgetting the individuals who might be suffering from loneliness and people who perhaps live alone or maybe live with family but don't have connection to friends or peers or people their own age. And I think that there's a risk of, I hate to use the word sort of shadow pandemic because it sounds a bit alarmist, but I think this idea, and I know there've been lots of studies on this, of instances of loneliness going up, particularly acute amongst young people. And I think because it's not an obvious category to say, these are parents or these are folks who are less able-bodied or whatever, I do worry that is a cohort that might get forgotten, and that I'm not sure, I think to HS's point, I'm not sure that we've cracked it yet. And I think that actually discussions like this and hearing that people are struggling with some of the same issues is quite helpful, because that's the way to problem solve. I think if organizations retreat and try to answer these things for themselves, something can get lost.
Yeah.
Agree, big time.
I'm well aware we have 2 minutes, and John, I know you have to drop off at 5. Just in
I'll
terms
wait, Emma. I'll just wait.
In terms of one more question, how about, do you see the move towards a more integrated public affairs or corporate affairs function increasing? And where does the function report into at the global level? A tricky one for the final question. So, I mean, from my perspective, I'm seeing that. From talking to lots of organizations, seeing their in-house functions, I do feel it's becoming far, far, far more integrated. However, if we're referring to public affairs, I do still see that being more on its own, I think, in general. But whether that will change in time. But I think most organizations are definitely integrating their function, bringing teams together, marketing, digital, social, comms, internal, external, and bringing it as one and trying to operate as one and not have silos.
Yeah, so maybe I'll go with this one. I think what's going to be the new model for corporation is that, it doesn't matter how they structure. It's more what is going to be the best solution for their business. And I think if you are joining in-house, in particular, and I'm in an agency, but maybe I am consulting from an outsider view, but I think rather than trying to really look at, is this a independent or are we integrated? It's no longer that important, because even if it's independent, in few months or even in few years, who knows what this could be. But what is going to be important is the fact that whether it's an integrated role or it becomes more integrated, or it becomes a more solid corporate and, integrated, being separated, whatever the situation may be, the comms people, we're going to be much more valued going forward in a lot of the discussion points that's that decision-making process. And I think that is the important part that we need to work to be able to keep up the capability to do that. And also, that's what's going to be more important from my view than, is this separate or are we integrated? I mean, I think that's just being a bit too, our language, if you know what I mean, right? So that's my view.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, look, in terms of time, I think I better thank very much the panelists. Thank you so much.